Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. Okay, everybody, today I'm going to start out a little bit different. We're going to present to you a call that we received from Spain, from Fernando. Listen up.
Hi, my name is Fernando. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you very much for your application. It's really helping me to go through the day. I listen to it early in the morning, and it's a blessing. My base group is far away from here, so it's a brilliant way for me to start the morning. It's my meeting in between meetings, and my meetings are quite not the same as they used to be, but thank you very much. I appreciate it. My warm and kindest regard from Spain. Thank you very much. Keep well. Bye.
Thank you so much for calling in and leaving that message, Fernando. Warmest regards to you as well in Spain from across the pond in America. Don't know if the listeners caught all of that, but he said his base group, which would be our home group here in the United States, is very far away from his home now because he had to move. And we're so glad that Sober Speak can be a small portion supplement, if you will, of your recovery. And we're glad to have you as part of the community. So you too can leave a message if you would like to. Go to the Contact Us tab at soberspeak.com. There is a little microphone icon, and we would absolutely love to hear from you. This episode today, this particular episode that you are listening to right now is brought to you by Deborah and Don C. Deborah and Don C. went to our website, soberspeak.com, clicked on the donate tab, and made a contribution. Thank you so much for your generous contribution. As we are listener supported, this episode is for you, Deborah and Don C. So just a couple of quick program notes again. Don't forget, we are on Twitter now. The handle is sober_speak. You can also hear us, if you would like to, on YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and you can even queue us up on Alexa. Just say, Alexa, play Sober Speak podcasts. But that's enough of that. Let's go into this episode right now. So what you're going to be hearing, who you're going to be hearing from next is Mr. Eric B. Just in case you didn't catch Eric's original recording on Sober Speak, he is on, and you can go back and look this one up, episode number 16. And episode number 16 is called Doctor, Alcoholic, and Candy Addict. And to make a long story short, my wife was out walking one day listening to Eric's episode number 16, and she came back into the house and she was absolutely taken away by Mr. Eric's episode and his description of alcoholism and so many other things that he had to say on that episode number 16. So, and I've heard Mr. Eric share in meetings before, and he had created, and I knew this. In fact, we talked about it on his last episode, but we never got into it. He had created a Cliff Notes version of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which he used for himself to kind of simplify things in the beginning, and still uses them. And so I wanted to get him back on the program and talk about those Cliff Notes version of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So here we go with Eric. You're going to hear me start out by, I'm asking him a little bit about his background, his medical degree, and his business background, and then we'll take it from there. Enjoy, Eric.
That's right. I'm a general internist, and I also am somewhat of an entrepreneur. I started a business as well, and in doing so, I have done a lot of sales. So I'm like a physician who like does sales, right? Which is like, I'm like guaranteed to be an alcoholic, right? If you read all the stories in the big book, it's like physicians and salespeople. So yeah. And my, maybe it's sleep deprivation or the alcoholic brain, but I just had the hardest time like remembering the 12 steps. So people would refer to various steps in the meeting and be like, oh, step 4, step 7, step 11. And I'm like, whoa, I'd be like trying to follow along with like the sign on the wall. And I couldn't keep up with which step they were talking about. So my Cliff's Notes version is 1, I am broken. 2, have an open mind. 3, trust in God. 4, list your faults. 5, confess your faults. 6, have God remove your faults. 7, through humility. 8, list those you've hurt. 9, fix it when possible. 10, do it again and again and again. 11, not my will, but God's will be done. 12, pass it on.
Okay, that's fantastic. So I was writing, but I couldn't keep up as quickly as I wanted. And by the way, if you send me a written version of those particular steps, I will put them in the show notes for this particular show so people can go back and review them if they would like to do that. So let me go ahead and start with the first one. And the first one was trust. I'm broken. Yeah, I'm sorry. The second was trusting God. I'm broken. So what does that mean? And talk a little. And by the way, let's go ahead and correlate it to the quote real steps, so to speak.
Yeah, and I've got my 12 and 12 in front of me, so I've got the actual steps here too. So step 1 is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. So the Cliff's Notes version is I'm broken. Yeah, so by the way, John, because even then I couldn't even remember all, I try to remember all 12 of my Cliff's Notes version, and I have a hard time with that. So I've shortened it even more to 2. So basically, in my mind, I can summarize steps 1 through 11 with be humble. And then step 12 is pass it on. So I'm broken. Be humble. I mean, there is no way that anyone is going to be open to the behavior change and the mental change and the spiritual change necessary until they admit to themselves that they are broken and that they have a problem. And it's like, I've got 3 kids, and it's like, if my kids think they already know something, like they are not going to be open to my quote unquote suggestion to them. So it's only, I have to like very calmly and politely like persuade them or show them that they actually don't already know the answer. And so there's somewhere is either in the Big Book or the 12 and 12, where it's like, listen, at the end of the day, all of us alcoholics, we really just need to grow up. And, there's another name for adults, and they're called large children. And I certainly was just a large, middle-aged child, because I was broken and I didn't think I was broken. And that, now, specifically, it says we're powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable. Now, I think I'm about 2 years in to my sobriety, and that's a really big pill to swallow, that you're like broken in a lot of ways. So I think it's very correct that step one says that we're powerless over alcohol. We're broken about alcohol. And I would say that in the beginning, I was like, okay, I'm broken as it relates to alcohol, but I was not yet ready to admit my brokenness in so many other areas. And I would say that it's really been over the past couple of years that I have been learning to be more and more humble, to really see, it's like the layers of an onion, to really see the multifaceted degree of my brokenness. So, when in doubt, when I'm faced in a situation, I kind of say to myself, okay, how am I broken about this? Because chances are I probably am. Absolutely. It's the, it points to this so many places in the 12 and 12, in the Big Book too, where it says it's our natural instincts gone awry. And I think it is just our natural instincts to always look at other people's brokenness and not our own. And it's just gotten totally out of whack, right? It's not that you should never look at somebody else's brokenness. I mean, obviously there's situations that are, like physically abusive or criminal or, whatever. But at the same time, you can just overdo it, which I totally did, which most alcoholics do. I was overdoing it in terms of pointing the finger at other people and their brokenness and not looking at my own. And so it's really a matter of turning it around, which really opens the door. All these steps. I mean, obviously, Bill and Dr. Bob are super smart. All these steps really lead into the next one, and they have to be done in order, because until you admit to your brokenness, you're never even going to begin to have an open mind. And then I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but until you have an open mind, you're never going to be like, this is a spiritual solution, which is what step 3 is. Because you're like, dude, I just want to drink. I've had bad experiences with religion. And, David, one of the members of our group, says this very emphatically. And even after a year of sobriety, I was like, really? I mean, you really feel that way? He's like, look, this is a spiritual solution. Spiritual. This is, unless you get that, you're probably going to go back out and drink. This is a spiritual solution, which, a lot of people don't hit you between the eyes like that. And it reminds me, frankly, one of my favorite stories, John, that I actually just recently read in the 12 and 12 is in the 12 traditions part. And I actually had only read the 12 steps because I'm like, I'm new at this. I'm not into the whole like group thing yet. That's a little advanced. But we had a new meeting where Dawn talked about a tradition. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty interesting. It was a really good meeting. I'm like, maybe I should read the 12 traditions. And there's a story in the 12 traditions about the guy who's not an agnostic. He's a sworn atheist. And he's like, listen, and it was early in the days of AA. He's like, look, you guys, I'm totally into what you do. Like, I totally get it. You've totally helped me out. But guess what? This God thing is for the birds. And, you're weak for having this whole faith religious thing. And the story is so funny because, and I think it's told by Bill. And he's like, and all of us are like, we were actually hoping he would go back out and drink. they were actually hoping for his demise. And like, it went on like this for years, and he still was sober, and he still didn't believe in God. So I'm like, what gives with this guy? And so finally he comes in, and he looks like totally like, out of it. And they're like, oh man, he's totally gone back out. He's totally gotten drunk. And he realizes that he really screwed up with this faith thing. And the punchline of the story is that he had not gone out and drunk, and this is like multiple years, maybe even a decade later, but he found God. And so really the fact that, and there's a lot of people in AA that are like that, right? That aren't really into the whole God thing and the spirituality thing. And that's okay. Like, because eventually they will. And so anyway, there's no way you're going to be open to that until you admit that you're broken and that you actually have an open mind about things.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about step 2. And, there are people listening to this who, you always hear about, oh, no, the God thing, so to speak. So, and as you know, you don't have to believe in God in order to come to AA, or you could be an atheist, you could be agnostic, you could be anything you want. But it's a little bit of a challenging subject. But how do you bridge that gap, so to speak, between the God thing for those who have neatly evaded it up to this point, if you will, and successfully working your way through the steps? I know it's a little bit of a difficult question, but just your experience with it. And did you come in an atheist or agnostic?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because I would say that I'm a Christian, but I would say that my version of Christianity was as close to atheism as possible. And what do I mean by that? There is a sort of, I don't want to call it a school, but there's a type of belief that's called deism. And that is that, yes, we believe in God. Yes, we believe there is a creator of the universe, but that God kind of, caused the Big Bang, set everything in motion, gave us free will. And then after that, he was kind of hands off. And this is to go along with my delusions of grandeur. This thought of deism is what actually the majority of founding fathers in America believed. So George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, they were all James Madison, they're all deists. So they believed in God, but they also believed this was the age of the Enlightenment, right? So they believed in, free will and science and the ability of people to use their intellect to overcome challenges and solve problems, et cetera, et cetera. So that really was my, and I didn't describe myself as a deist, but if you actually, if I actually thought about it, like, that's what I was. And so when I thought about like God, like literally God's will being communicated to me on a daily or an hourly or a weekly basis, and trying to attune myself to God's will, and how me exercising my own will was actually the origin of many of my problems, like I did not have an open mind to that. And all step 2 is saying is, listen, we're not saying you're wrong, but let's just look at some other ways of viewing this situation. Okay? Let's just look at it. You don't have to go, whole hog into it, but let's just look at it. It's like pause. Like, that's all step 2 is to me. It's like pause. And I think that is perfectly placed between 1 and 3.
So very well put. Okay. So, like you said, it's just a matter of opening the door. Let's take a look at it from another direction. Maybe leave some of your prejudice behind that you have developed over the years, and let's look at this in another way. All right. So then we go to step 3. And step 3 for you is
trusting God. So step 3 is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And so that is, as I mentioned, that AA is a spiritual solution. And especially the early folks in AA, they used God, but you can say higher power. And this is where people talk about like the group being the higher power. And that's totally fine. God as you understand them to be. And there's a whole bunch of ways of looking at it. And there's a story, again, I think it's in the 12 and 12, which is an awesome story. It's like, look, let's pretend that AA was created in Japan. And they said, you have to believe in Buddha in order for you to be cured of your alcoholism. And let's say a Japanese person came to America and said that. We'd be like, that's kind of weird, right? And so, vice versa. If you took, Judeo-Christian, whatever, version of, God and brought that to Japan, they'd be like, what gives? So You don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. But it is a spiritual solution. And it's like, okay. And because I believed in, believe in God, believe in a spiritual aspect to every single person. And like, I'm okay with that. So immediately upon step 3 in my mind, I said to myself, okay, great. It's a spiritual solution. What the heck does that mean? Like, what do I do? Okay, great. Get it. God's involved. How is God involved? And guess what happens? You get step 4. It's perfectly lined up.
And your version of step 4, once again, is?
So step 4 is list your faults. I actually said list your sins, but list your faults. So step 4 is made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And so it's like, oh, now it's about to get real. I feel like AA, like it like starts to get real in step 4, because you have to start doing things that are uncomfortable. Okay. And so again, our instincts are to not do things that are uncomfortable. If you're cold, you put on a coat. If you're hot, you take off your coat. Your instincts are to try to make yourself as comfortable as possible. And so now we're saying, hey, buddy, or hey, ma'am, you need to really begin to humble yourself and write down, right? Not just say it, but actually write down your faults and your sins, okay? Which begins this super huge process of addressing denial and delusion and self-justification. Because alcoholics are different in many ways, but one of the ways in which we are all similar is we are incredibly good at fooling ourselves. And I certainly was very good at fooling myself, and I still am. Another fun story is one of the long-timers in our group is Renee, and Renee, was sharing. She said, and I keep forgetting. She's 10 plus years of sobriety. She's like, and I keep forgetting this stuff, so that's why I got to keep coming back. And I told her the next time I saw her, I'm like, I'm so glad you said that, because I keep forgetting all this stuff too, and I thought something was wrong with me because I forget it, and I have to keep coming back to remember. And she's like, no, I forget it all the time. I'm like, oh man. So everybody forgets it. So I was just forgetting it like crazy. So you come back. Okay, so fine. You list all this stuff out, and you're like, okay, so I got this piece of paper, I got this list. Now what do I do? And it's like, that's just the beginning of showing some humility. Now you got to take the next step of discomfort. And the next step of discomfort of fine is confess your faults. Okay, so step 5 is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. And the 12 and 12 is wonderful about this. It's like, well, can't I just talk directly to God? So I am, I'm Protestant, and so that's like the whole thing, right? Is that the individual can just talk directly to God. And I'm like, dude, I was taught growing up, I can just talk directly to God, right? And the 12 and 12 is like, listen, even people that are very spiritually advanced say that it's really good to talk to another person, because frankly, if you talk to another person, it's embarrassing. and being embarrassed is good. Like, you need to feel embarrassed. Like, it needs to be hard. You have to swallow some humble pie. Okay. So confessing in theory and confessing in the quiet of your room to God is one thing, but confessing to another person is something very different. And intellectually, I said to myself, no, it's not that different. I can do it. But literally to get the words out of my mouth was hard. It felt bad. And in fact, I did some more 5th step work with my sponsor just on Friday. Was that yesterday? And guess what? And he's been my sponsor for 2 years. He's great. I know he's not judgmental. He even said that to me. He's, look, I'm not going to judge you. It was still really hard for me to do. I mean, my pride and my ego just welled right up again. And and what's helpful is that's when I knew I was doing the right thing. When it's hard, I'm like, aha, I know I'm working the steps right when it makes me uncomfortable. If I'm working the 12 steps comfortably, I'm probably not doing it for real. So I was keeping it real on Friday. And guess what? Like afterwards, we prayed together, and I felt much better, man. And then like well, I'll get to it later on when we talk about 9 and 10. But, I've done that to other people too. And every time I do it, man, I feel like a freaking idiot. I feel so stupid and low. And, and that's after 2 years. I figure, okay, well, after 2 years, I got it, right? Like I can do this. I can just, admit that I'm stupid and wrong and blah, blah, blah. But every time I do it, it's hard. So I obviously still have a lot of work to do. So you got to confess your sins, because that is, again, it's like, step 1, you think you're humble? Not really. Step 2, be humble. Step 3, be humble. Step 4, be humble. Step 5, no. You really got to be humble. Okay. So that gets us to step 5. Yeah. So 6 is, okay, so fine. At that point, so there's 2 types of it's either the 12 steps of the 12 tradition says that in general, alcoholics can go either into 2 camps. They either go into the depressives, the people who are just filled with guilt, or they're the grandiose, prideful, arrogant SOBs. Okay. And it's, and in our group, like I people can, admit to that. They're like, yeah, I was really depressed. I was feeling guilty about all this stuff. And like, I was not like that. Like I was the arrogant SOB, and my sponsor, super helpful. He's like, dude, I was totally the arrogant SOB. That's like exactly the type. And like he's like the depressive people. I can't relate to them. But like, that's why he's been such a great sponsor for me. And so I'm like, okay, great. I got this list sitting in front of me, and like, I get it. Okay. I'm an idiot. Okay. I get it. Like I've really screwed up in a lot of ways. Like, what are we going to do about this? And what we're going to do about this is where then step 3 comes back, and it says, hey, this is a spiritual solution. God's going to remove these faults. Okay. And this is where I tried for multiple years to quit drinking on my own. And I'm like, look, I got willpower in so many other areas. I can work 36 hours straight. I can work 28 out of 30 days in a month. I mean, I have willpower beyond belief. I had a second child that had colic, and I slept with him on my chest every night for 2 months. I walked back and forth with him almost every night for 2 years. I'm like, I have willpower. I can do this. Guess what? I do not have willpower over alcohol. I do not. And I was dumbfounded for multiple years as to why it is that I did not have willpower over alcohol, but I had all of this other willpower in other areas of my life. And guess what? It says that exact same thing in the big book in the 12 and 12. It says alcoholics tend to have a lot of willpower in other areas of their lives, but they don't have willpower over alcohol. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm just like everybody else who's an alcoholic. Okay, makes sense. All right. So great. So this is a spiritual solution. So 6 is, in the official wording for step 6, is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, right? So have God remove your faults, okay? This is, and even on Friday, right? So when I prayed together with my sponsor, we said, God, please help remove this fault from Eric. Like, this is not me and my willpower. And like, to me, that's really where you got to take a leap of faith. And that's where step 2 kicks in. You got to be open-minded. Oh, but that doesn't make any sense. That's right. It doesn't make any sense. And guess what? There's a lot of things in this world that don't make sense to you that are correct and that work. What? There's a lot of things in this world that are correct and right and don't make sense to you. Oh, okay. Like, and you can apply that to your life directly as it relates to your alcoholism, right? I mean, at the end of the day, the percentage of people that actually know how electricity works to turn your lights on, it's actually very low. Like, how do electrons actually flow through these wires, get from like the power plant, spinning thing with the magnets, and you flip your switch and light comes on. Like, I don't know how that works, but it does. And that exact same analogy is used in the AA literature as well. So I'm like, okay, I'm plugging into that. Again, that's from the AA literature. Plug into that source. Don't get caught up. Yeah, you don't understand it. Congratulations. Almost nobody else does it either. Right. So, okay. So anyway, And then step 7 finally says, step 7 in the book is humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. And this is where the 12 and 12 is just awesome, right? Because step 6 and 7 are really short in the big book, but in the 12 and 12, they get into a lot of detail. And so step 7 is all about humility. So here we have steps 1 through 6. Be humble, be humble, be humble, be humble, be humble, be humble. And then step 7 says, be humble. Okay, what does humility mean? What does it mean? And this is where a lot of people have been like, well, I don't really know what humility means. And this is where it gives you a definition of humility. And in fact, it gives you, it basically says, look, humility is just that you are not God. You are not perfect. Like, people get it confused with humiliating because it sounds similar, but it's totally different. Okay. Being humble means you are not the master of the universe. You are not in control. You are not God. But guess what? As soon as you realize that you are not God, that's when you can start working to make yourself better. Again, with my kids, my son, who's 8, thinks he's awesome at tennis. He is not awesome at tennis. There is no way that I can teach him to be better at tennis when he already thinks he is awesome at tennis. And so if I'm sitting here thinking that I have all this willpower and all this control, and I would never use the words like I'm God, but I certainly was acting like it, then how in the world am I going to be open to the instruction of the higher power or the force or the universe or nature to improve myself? And so that's where, and again, how do I know? Because for me, the prideful, arrogant alcoholic, how do I know that I am humble or I'm acting humble? It's uncomfortable. So anytime I think I'm being humble and it doesn't make me uncomfortable, I'm probably not really being humble. How do I know that? Because for like my entire lifetime, I used to be like, oh, I'm an incredibly humble person. I would brag about my humility, right? So that is where, like, dude, you are not humble. You think you are humble. You do not even know the first of it. And you're like, okay, so, 6 and 7, it's like, okay, spiritual. Okay, so you've done this to your sponsor, right? And now so it gets real in step 4. It gets real in step 8, because, so step 8 is officially it is made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Okay, so now we got to make a list, but it's not a list about ourselves. It's about a list of how we've screwed up socially with other people, typically people that we love, typically people that we see often, typically people that have been very influential and instrumental in our lives, typically people who have done a lot of wrong to us. And it's like, yeah, I've done a lot of wrong things to them, but you know what? They deserved it. I mean, after what they did to me, of course I did that stuff to them. Any rational person would have done those things to them after what they did to me. And so now you have to start listing a lot of people who, in many ways, are your enemies. It's like, okay, I got this list. I hope I never have to do anything with it. I'm going to burn it, right? I don't, so I got this list here. And the big book even talks about, and 12 talk about, how you got to be careful about this list, that if, a sponsor is with a sponsor, in my opinion, but probably most AAs would agree with this, it's the only way you'd be able to figure this out. Because in my opinion, the 12, people like the AA is real simple. It's really like, honestly, to me, it's not. I actually think it's really freaking complicated. And maybe it's just complicated for me. I could see how, maybe other people don't think it's complicated, but definitely for me, it is complicated. I need another person to be like, look, this is what's going on here. This is why we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do that. You can't pick that up in a meeting. You can't pick that up by reading it on your own. I mean, you have to have a sponsor work through this. And that is especially true for step 8. Because, okay, you've listed this stuff. And now in step 8 for me is list those you've hurt. And then step 9 in my version is fix it. And step 9 is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. And that's where it's like, okay, be careful.
Yeah.
And I'm going to
So let me just do a little mid-tro announcement here before we go on with step 9. We'll continue our conversation with Mr. Eric in just a moment. Just a reminder, you are listening to Sober Speak. You can find us on the internet at soberspeak.com. Like I said earlier, there you can find all the back episodes. We have about 38, 39 or so published episodes already. You can also find the donate button there on our website, which you can use if the Spirit moves you to do such. Please keep in mind, this podcast is funded by you, the listener. SoberSpeak is a self-supporting organization through our own contributions. We are not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. We do not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorse nor oppose any causes. All right, now back to Mr. Eric in step 9.
Yeah, so on step 9, it needs to be done the right way, because depending upon, I mean, there's stories in the big book where it's like, okay, well, if you make amends to people, I mean, the other person might like respond by like trying to kill you, literally, or the person might, respond by, turning into the police, or the person might respond to you by, suing you for all you're worth. And so it's not a question of, do you do it or do you not do it? It's almost more a question of how and why and when, and that's different for every person. And so that's where I was super lucky in that my sponsor has been in AA for like 30 years. And so that's where, frankly, for me, I haven't sponsored anybody, but I mean, only being 2 years in, I would have a real hard time sponsoring somebody. I mean, I raised my hand and mean, yes, I'll sponsor somebody, but I would have a real hard time walking somebody through 9. I mean, frankly, all I would do is read the big book and the 12 and 12 and be like, listen, they're smart. We should just do what it says in there. And again, so one of the hardest ones I had to do for step 9 is when I had to, one of the people on my list was one of my business partners that I started a business with. And I had been very, frankly, just mean to him. And I had been short-tempered and rude and disrespectful. Like, I wouldn't just say on multiple occasions. I would say on like almost every single interaction that I had with him for probably the previous like 3 or 4 years. And we would meet more than weekly. And I always, in my self, justifying, denial, delusional way, I'm like, I'm doing this for the sake of the company and the business, because, if you need to make a life or death decision, you're gonna cut the crap and forget the like niceties, and you're gonna do what's right to save the person's life or whatever. And again, you're like, oh, well, that's just me, riding in on my white horse, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, that was childish behavior on my part. And it was really my attempt to control too much in a very, in a way that was a result of, just like the book says, it was a manifestation of fear. It was a manifestation of ego. And I sat down with him in his office across from him. He's sitting at his desk. I was on the chair across from him, and I looked at him, and I literally couldn't open my mouth because I felt so stupid. I felt such an idiot. And I'm like, I've totally wronged this guy. Like the self-justification was gone. And I was like, and I said it. And then I said, and before you forgive me or not forgive me, what do you have to say? What would you like to say? And he really opened up, and he's like, yeah, look, you have been completely disrespectful to me. And, yada, 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 yada. And just like the big book says, he was very merciful at the end. He's like, look, I appreciate that you've come here and said this. A lot of people would never do that. Now, I am not going to assume that you're going to change. Like you're going to have to prove that you're going to act better repeatedly over time, and we'll see, which is completely fair. But it was so hard, and it was hard with my wife. It was hard. I did it with my kids. It was hard with my kids. I'm like, it's going to make me less of the authority figure in the house if I apologize and make amends to my kids. And what was that? That was dumb. That was my ego coming back. And if anything, over the last couple of years, I think it's showed my kids that they themselves can apologize for being wrong because they've seen me apologize for being wrong. And I was like, well, phew, that certainly was not a benefit I was anticipating. So there you go. The 12 and 12 is a parenting book. So
you told me something once about a incident, like at a bank, if I'm not mistaken, where you had to kind of go back and eat some humble pie there. Do I remember something like that?
Yeah. So about 2 months ago, my just real quick, my son, who's 4, was just tearing up the house, going crazy, and I'd actually made an appointment to go to the bank, and so I'm like, "Hey, buddy, you're coming with me to the bank." And so what we do is we go to the bank, and they've got some. We had submitted a check online, through the app, blah blah. It was not showing up. It had not shown up for a day, for 2 days, for 3 days, and I'm like, and it wasn't a huge check. It was like for a few $100, but it kept not showing up. And so I was like, we've done this for years, and it's always worked. It's always shown up immediately. It did not show up. And the lady gave me some sort of malarkey answer. And then I said, well, listen, we got to talk to your boss about this. So she goes and she leaves the room, and she comes back and she said, well, my direct supervisor is not here, but we got to call in to the supervisor center or whatever. So we call in, and the woman on the phone tells me, she's on speakerphone, so the banker's there, I'm there, and she's like, look, the bank's policy is such that we reserve the right to put any check you deposit on hold for 72 business hours at our discretion to review for fraud. And I said, well, I think you're gaming the system. I mean, this check was from like one of the largest financial institutions in America. I'm like, this check was not from Bubba. Okay. And so, and so what I did was then I started chewing her out, and she's like, well, look, if you want the money direct sent to you right away, then you can just have it wire transferred instead of a check. And so then I was even dumber. Like I said to her, I'm like, so you mean to tell me that I'm supposed to anticipate when somebody's going to write me a check, know that they're going to be from a source that you're going to consider fraudulent. I'm going to tell them to wire the bank the money. I'm going to give them the wire instructions, and then they're going to wire it. And that's how I can avoid this happening. And I did not use a nice voice when I said that. And so anyway, I finished what I was doing. My son is like, hey, I gotta use the potty. And I'm like, do you have a potty in the bank? So, yeah, but it's in the back. So we go, we use a potty. I'm helping my son pull up his pants in the potty. And I'm like, shoot, I got to make an amend. I was way out of line there. And so we go back into her office, and I said, I'm like, look, I was wrong. I spoke to you in a mean voice, and I should not have done that. Will you forgive me? And she said, look, I mean, it's completely understandable why you were frustrated. And I looked at my son and I said, hey, it's not okay to speak to people in a mean voice. And the punchline is, he looked at me and he said, Dad, I already know that. So obviously my 4-year-old son knows, but I do not. So, and that's, and guess what? I did that because I didn't want to drink. I didn't do that because I'm some like huge, like moral person, blah, blah, blah. Like I just did it because, dude, I really don't want to drink. And I will go to any length, right? I'll go to any length. I do not want to drink. And if it involves saying you're sorry to the lady at the bank, I will say, again, I say it like it's so easy. Just say you're sorry to the lady at the bank. It's not easy. I felt like a freaking idiot. But I probably gave her a good story. She probably went home to her family. She goes, "You'll never guess what happened today." This guy flips out, comes back.
All right, so let's move on to step 10 there. First of all, the step 10, what it says in the big book, and then your version of it.
So step 10 is, all right, so officially it is continue to take a personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admit it. So step 10 is do it again and again and again in my short term. And the point is, just like Renee says, you keep forgetting. So it's not like you go through this once and you're done and you're fixed. Like, you got to stay after it. So that, that bank incident was just, look, you got to go over it again and again. And there's different ways to do it. I do it actually, ironically, at night while I'm putting my son to bed. Things are kind of quiet. And so as he's falling asleep or after he's falling asleep, I think to myself, I'm like, okay, what did I do today? What did I not do today? Where was I wrong? And again, this is a really funny story. So about a year ago, I had a pretty good day. I'm like, I don't think I was out of line. Like, I don't think I wronged anybody. I actually did a couple things that were right. I had a pretty good day. Okay. My son's asleep. I'm like, okay, I don't think I need to make any amends to anybody. I did good. I go downstairs and my wife chews me out for something. And I immediately turn around and totally lay into her with my words. And it was just childish. And I just flew off the handle. And I ended up sleeping on the couch. And I said to myself as I was falling asleep on the couch, I'm like, serves me right for looking through to see if I had done anything wrong. And I had said no. And then 5 minutes later, I do something very wrong. So I said to myself, well, I'm never going to do that again. So now I don't do it when my son goes to bed. I do it at the very, 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 very end of the day when I am not going to talk or do anything else. When the day is like really done. Because if I don't do it at the very end, there is a possibility that it might happen again. It might happen during the day. So, and that's where too. And then it goes into step 11. And that's just to be like, look, okay. And so this is real interesting. So step 11. So step 11 officially is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. So in other words, not my will, but God's will be done. And I have a real hard time with that. Pray and meditate. Like, okay, when I pray like the Lord's Prayer. I pray like God is great and God is good, and we thank him for food. By his hands we all are fed. Give us, Lord, our daily bread. Amen. Okay, I got that one down. I got the Lord's Prayer down. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. Bless me through the starry night and make me when the sun shines bright. Amen. Okay, great. Those three, do not lightning bolts don't come down and tell me what to do when I say those three things. Okay, so, saying wasn't doing it for me either. So I had a real hard time. I'm like, how in the world is praying or meditating do it? And so this is where the 12 and 12 really helped me out, where it says, do the prayer of St. Francis. And so I'm going to see if I can do this. So, see, this is why. Here we go. Okay. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace, that where there is hatred, let me bring love, that where there is wrong, I may bring the spirit of forgiveness, that where there is discord, I may bring harmony. Where there is error, I may bring truth. Where there is doubt, I may bring faith. Where there is despair, I may bring hope. Where there is darkness, I may bring light. And where there is sadness, I may bring joy. Pause. O divine master, grant that I may seek rather to comfort than be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is in self-forgetting that one finds, or actually another version says it is in pardoning that one is pardoned, and it is by giving that we receive, and it is in dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. And so that's what I say now when I go to sleep, because that is like, it's a good start. It's like training wheels. It's like prayer and meditation training wheels for me. So frankly, after 2 years, I do not have this prayer and meditation thing down, but I really have felt like that prayer of St. Francis in step 11 has, and it's, St. Francis, he's a saint in the Catholic Church. It's like, you don't have to be into all that. I mean, you could call it the prayer of Shiva or Vishnu or Buddha or, Allah, what have you. I mean, it is, universally, it's like, in order to be pardoned, you need to pardon. In order to be, loved, you need to love. Your pride needs to die for you to truly live. And so that's helped. I'm still working on that one, but that has helped. And then step 12 is pass it on. And that's actually not all of step 12, right? Because all of step 12 is 9, 10, 11, 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So it's really pass it on and then practice it in all of your affairs. That's really what it is. And that's part of the reason that I go to AA meetings. It's part of the reason why I listen. It's part of the reason why I share with you. It's part of the reason why I do not do the kind of service work that Bill and Bob did. I don't. And that's a shortcoming on my part, and I need to be better at that. Yeah, well, I am so thankful for you, John, and I'm so thankful for this podcast. And I'll just tell you one quick story at the end. As I went on a short weekend away from my anniversary with my wife, and at the resort, what was everybody doing? They were all drinking. Okay. And I'm like, I gotta get to an AA meeting. And so I went to your podcast and I listened to David's podcast and Dawn's podcast. And that was super helpful when I was like, I didn't really have, it wasn't really like a craving, but it was just kind of like one of those things like, it'd be good for me to go to a meeting now. And listening to that podcast was super helpful. So John, I want to tell you, you have helped me, and Dawn and David you guys have already helped me more than you already know.
Okay, boys and girls, that does it for our episode with Mr. Eric B. Once again, we want to thank Dawn C. and Deborah for going to the website, clicking on the donate tab, and submitting a contribution. Your generosity is so appreciated. So don't forget, we welcome all your thoughts and feedback. We would love to hear from you. You can email us at feedback@soberspeak.com, or you can actually contact me on Twitter. The handle is sober_speak. And my name, once again, is John M. And I'm going to read from page 164 of the Big Book here to close us out. By the way, just in case you don't know what the Big Book is, that is the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Page 164 says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. See you next time.